Hey everybody, welcome to Late Night Snacks, the OrderEZ F&B podcast slash talk show, radio show, really just our opportunity to get together and share what's on our mind and what we're seeing going on in the F&B scene. I am Emilio Villarruel, Director of Marketing at OrderEZ, and we're joined by none other than Jeffrey Meese.
Hey Emilio, very excited to do our first edition of Late Night Snacks.
Yes, very excited as well. So we have, the first edition of Late Night Snacks coming out. And with that, we have the introduction of our cocktail recipe. This one is the Don Papa Punch, which, cheers.
Cheers.
I'm hoping I don't poison my company CEO with a bad recipe, but we'll see.
Delicious.
This one works too. It may work because it's the second one, so the first one's already just kind of gotten me, happy enough. We'll say.
You got to warm up. You can't come into these things cold.
Absolutely not. I mean, and you never see a NASCAR race where they just go off. They do a couple laps around first.
The warm up is important.
Indeed. And I'll be honest. I have been. This is going to be very apparent to anyone who's part of the Amuse-Bouche readership and who gets to take a look at some of the cocktails that I come up with. I have no formal bartender training, anything like that. So, and I know that Jeff, at one point you had mentioned that you had some bartending experience. So I'm a little bit like, he didn't mention this before I started doing these recipes. Oh man. So a little extra pressure to try and research to get, the flavors right.
Yeah, to call me a bartender might be a gross overstatement. I was the classic kind of restaurant bartender where the extent of my drink repertoire was the Manhattan to pouring wine, pulling beer, and the occasional Gibson or a martini. So that was about as wild and crazy as we got.
Still, and as embarrassing as to admit, that's supersedes my experience, I'd say. Yeah. But one fun thing I love about OrderEZ is the fact that we all sort of have some F&B background going into it. For me, I worked as a line cook unsuccessfully for some time. I got relegated to the salad station after a while because reasons. But it was nice. I've always had a passion for food. It's something which growing up, like I watched Alton Brown and Good Eats and Iron Chef, and then I guess I kind of had this idea in mind that because I was super into it, that once I gave it a shot and tried it, I'd be good at it, which wasn't the case. But it's still a passion that stuck with me, and I'm kind of curious, what was it that what's your personal food journey look like?
Yeah. So, like so many American kids, I worked in bars and restaurants kind of through college. But I think that our food journeys started in very similar ways. As I was thinking back on this, my first job at a restaurant was in fact 20 years ago now. I started in kind of like the summer of 2000. I remember so vividly. There was one restaurant in town. It was a brew pub and a restaurant, and it was busy. And that is where I wanted to work. I didn't want to work at one of these kind of like okay places. I wanted to work at one of the great places. And when I went to do my interview, they said, before you can sit down and interview with anyone, here's your menu test. Like, we like you enough to invite you for the menu test, but here are all the items on the menu. You have to learn every ingredient of every menu item before we will formally sit down and interview you. And we will take a test. And if you do not score better than 95%, you don't get an interview. But in the US, that's so vital when you think about, working at busy restaurants versus slow restaurants. Especially, I was working front of house. So I was just looking to wait tables to start off with. So I wanted to work at the busiest place because the busiest place had the most covers. The most covers leads to the most tips. The most tips means, I'm making my way through college. So I worked at a little place in Lincoln, Nebraska called Jabrisco. It was like an international cuisine. through the lens of 20 years, international cuisine is kind of comical, but it was a really great restaurant. I loved it. I joined at a spectacular time where a bunch of other people were leaving, and suddenly the restaurant was kind of short-staffed, and I got the opportunity to move up the food chain very quickly. So I found myself as head waiter within the first 6 months, picking up bartending shifts, and then the summer hit, and I was sticking around town, and I wanted to pick up more shifts, but waiting tables and bartending over the lunch hour is not really where you make your money. But if you work in the prep kitchen, you make like a reasonable hourly wage. So I was like, you know what? I'm interested in food. So I tried to pick up more shifts. So basically, I worked a double like every day. I worked in the prep kitchen during the day, and then I waited tables and bartended at night. But it got me a chance to kind of work in every seat of the restaurant, including, which I think is probably one of the most underappreciated jobs, is washing dishes. Like being on the dishwasher on a Friday night is a special kind of hell, and it is intense. Everybody is ungrateful, and you're just like, oh my God, the dishes just keep coming. And it was good. Once you've done it, you can look back. And I think this is, one of the things that I kind of separate the universe of people into is the people who've worked in F&B and the people who've not worked in F&B, because we all interact with it in some way, shape, or form. Whether everybody goes out to eat at least at some point. And if you've waited tables, you have a certain empathy that you can pull from, that if you've actually never done the job, it's hard to really appreciate what it's like. It's hard to appreciate working a Sunday brunch when you're like, I've made $20. I'm 6 hours into this shift. This is garbage. At least I have that one big 5 top in the back that's going to, that'll make my shift. And then they do something crazy like don't tip you. Or one of my personal favorites was I got a pocket Bible as a tip. And although, that was real. Sunday brunch, 5 top, pocket Bible. And I appreciate all faiths. And if you're religious, wonderful for you. I am more spiritual than religious. I believe deeply in God, but I don't believe in pushing my religion on other people. And that was one of those moments where, I actually walked down the street and handed her Bible back and said, thank you, but I don't need this. And anyways, so if you've walked in those shoes and put in those hours, you have a different empathy for the job. And I look back on the time very fondly, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. And then I took what would be almost a 10-year break from being in F&B day to day. I did some consulting to the industry and to the hospitality and hotels, and like general managers, F&B directors, and basically the entire ex-com teams at big hotel chains. But that was more leadership and selection and recruitment stuff. But then fast forward, I found myself as the managing director of a coffee business that had been working on their first coffee shop for over a year and hadn't opened one. And it was my first chance to go back into the ground level. So I had gone from boots on the ground, doing every job in it, kind of went back to the consumer side, eventually found my way into consulting, and then suddenly was running a coffee business that was getting ready to open its first outlets. And I went from working with general managers and F&B directors to suddenly working with frontline baristas. It was like, whoa, this is very different. But I loved it. It was such a great experience. And a couple of things that really jumped out in that kind of transition, and this is kind of the 20-year arc of leading up to OrderEZ, is we went to open this coffee business. Basically, the business was run exactly the same as it was 15 years earlier. And I looked at that and was like, that is crazy. We didn't use micros for our POS, but people were still using micros for their POS. And that's what I used 20 years ago. And then how do you place orders, and how do you just pick up the phone calling, you're emailing, and you're clocking in on your POS, and the business was run very much the same way. And that was one of those moments where kind of light bulbs started to go off in my head to say, wow, in 20 years, not much has changed in this industry. And fast forward a couple of years, we opened 3 coffee shops in Singapore. It was a company called The New Black. It was space, age, really fancy specialty coffee from all over the world. It was an amazing experience, and I got to indulge another one of my passions. I love food. I love beverage. I like eating. I like drinking, kind of across the board. There's really not a lot of categories that I don't enjoy. Like, I like pu'er tea. I like baijiu. I like bourbon. I like cachaça. I like wine. I like beer. I like coffee. I like tea. And then on the food side, really kind of in the same vein. So, all of that experience really led to kind of what is my most recent F&B experiences, which were opening a alcohol distribution business. So we saw a spot in the marketplace, and my business partner, Andrew, and I said, you know what, we're doing a bunch of consulting into the industry. Let's just jump on this. There's clearly an opportunity here for a really great business. And so we tucked in. It was 2019, about this time, when we started working on our first products to try and bring them to Singapore. And we launched our business with a portfolio of 3 SKUs from one brand, quickly adding a second SKU from a second brand. But walking into a bar and trying to sell your portfolio of floral products was awfully hard. But it was, again, we were working with the people that we loved. And that's one of the things that I've loved about kind of the industry, is that it's the hospitality industry, but everybody's hospitable to each other as well. It's not just a face that people put on for their customers. It's, the people who are drawn to the industry are genuinely loving, caring, wonderful people that have built a real community around their work. And I guess, and that was that moment when we started building Dispatcher, was when we took all these learnings that kind of bubbled to a point and we said, from a technology perspective, there's not really a great solution. And that's when we started kind of laying the groundwork for what would become OrderEZ.
That's wow. I think it's the first time actually hearing the whole story in detail, and there's a lot to unpack there. A few things stood out to me, and maybe not the typical salient points. For example, the lady leaving a Bible as a tip. My first thought's like, as a marketer, there's a better way to get people on your side. That can't be you leave a great tip and then the Bible. That's how you get people to become fans.
That would have definitely been more effective.
If it was, they give you a Bible and inside was 100 tucked in, you would have been like, wow, praise the Lord.
Yeah.
And, it's funny was you talk about sort of the delineating people in between the two worlds of okay, you've worked in F&B and you haven't worked in F&B. And it's just kind of one of those things where, as you talk about it, I do think about when I'll go into a busy restaurant and my order kind of takes a little bit longer than, I would expect it should, or something like that. I sort of have the sense where I'm like, oh, I think 3 tables came in at about the same time. So they're probably just, a little bogged down, or I can see that, the front of house staff is kind of hustling and bustling. They're obviously working to catch up and bring the ticket times down. I'll just hang out a second, see what happens. Whereas I think that had that experience not been a part of it, where I'm not, at one point working flipping burgers with, it's a funny story. I in the middle of, because I worked in as well in one of those, beer and burger spots on campus. And I picked up a plate that somebody had set on the line. And the plate was fresh out of the oven, unbeknownst to me. And so I just scalded the entire, front facing side of my hands. Oh no, I was saying that someone had left a plate on the line, and me thinking, oh, gotta keep a clean line. I just see an empty plate there, that had some sauce on it. So, let me move this out of the way. Turns out that had just come out of the oven, complete burns on the palms of my hands. Oh. And mind you, this is the day of a football game. So, big U of A game. Someone else had called sick, so I'm working the line basically by myself. And right at the beginning of my shift, it's like, I no longer have hands to flip with. So I wrapped my hands in rags soaked in vinegar as per one of the other cook's instructions. And I just did it. And I try to think about if there's another situation, which I imagine they're probably more talented than ever I was in the kitchen, but you never know what's happening on the other side of the restaurant.
Absolutely. God, I don't think I realized that you worked in the restaurant in Arizona, in camp, like near campus, because I was 2 blocks away from Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, which is 6 or 7 days a year, however many home games are. It's the 3rd biggest city in the state of Nebraska. The stadium is, with, I think right now it's 86,000 people it holds. So every bar and restaurant gets the pregame slam and then the postgame slam. So I'm sure we have some very shared experiences. And then you have this real dead town in the middle. And it's like, oh, well, now we can go grab a bite to eat, watch the game a little bit because there's absolutely nobody here, and then get ready for when you see the game start to either get out of hand or come close to an end. It's like, all right, gear up, guys. Everybody's coming back. And they all come at once. It's just like
it's just like a Lord of the Rings moment. Just charge.
Oh, absolutely true. Yeah.
It's funny, and I think this is a good transition because you said something that I couldn't help but just chortle at it. And you're talking about your F&B likes and the different, alcohols and foods that you like. And if anyone's been following along in the Amuse-Bouche, will say that maybe I'm the pickier of the two of us by some stretch. And I had to just laugh when you mentioned baijiu because I've spent a considerable amount of time in China, and all of my baijiu experiences have, we'll say, ultimately been regrettable. I would previously describe it as a mixture between rubbing alcohol and lighter fluid. But I'm curious, you really enjoy baijiu?
Yeah, I love some funk, and baijiu has some funkiness to it, like blue cheese. I love some blue cheese. Like Jamaican rums, like have some funk to them. And baijiu, no, albeit my range of baijiu experience is pretty limited. We had a baijiu in the portfolio at Dispatcher for a little while called Hong Kong baijiu. And literally nobody else on the team, if we opened the top, they'd be like, get that out of here. Like, it was just not their thing.
That's the reaction that makes sense.
It's not like I would like seek it out, but I could appreciate it's a really interesting product. Like, it's from when you look at that, like how it's made and why it's made in the way that it is, it's like, all right, this is pretty fascinating. And there's some similarities with kind of techniques that are kind of coming from maybe the agave space, and it's just, and like I said, the Jamaican rum and some of these where they're just not as, it's not like gin, right? Gin, you got to call them still super scientific and like clean and laboratory in ways. Whereas like these other ones are like, they're just more, I don't know, guttural and kind of Neanderthal and historic. Like they have deep roots in what I think all of the spirits were like, 100 years ago or something like that, where we weren't quite so scientific about all of this. And there's something fun about that.
If I listen to you talk about it, it is a good sell. Unfortunately, I have to weigh this against the fact that I've tried baijiu. And so it's that would have been a great like pep talk speech right before trying it, except every single time. You still there, Jeff? Oh yeah, I was just saying every single time. It's been rough, we'll say.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I actually had an idea for a segment for us called Hot Takes, in which we go through and discuss some of the. There's been a few articles that have come out discussing, here's the next big thing for 2022, or here's some growing trends that we see kind of popping up in 2021 that we expect to become bigger, more commonplace in 2022. And Baijiu was actually one of the first ones I wanted to discuss with you because of the fact that I found it so surprising. So, yeah. I don't know. It's almost mind-boggling to me because I find it difficult to find that it would get mainstream appeal outside of, kind of the Asian diaspora, because it is so intense and it's such a punch. And granted, I've never had a Baijiu cocktail, but I imagine that would be a hard flavor to try and mask.
But I think that's what, if you're in that upper echelon of bartending and you're looking to set trends and differentiate yourself from everybody else, you kind of have to go into these unknown grounds. And the fact that it's a Baijiu cocktail is going to get people like, all right, I've never, if you think of the Western palate, most Americans, Europeans have never heard of Baijiu nor tried Baijiu. So like, the bartender can give them the speech that I gave or something along those lines that would have sold you on tasting it, but they have the skill to go with it, which I don't. Like, I can say that it's delicious and you can make it delicious. They can actually make it delicious. And I think that's one of the fun things, is to take this really kind of funky out there taste and to work it into a drink and make it work. And I think that's, the job of a bartender is many things, but at that kind of craftsman level where you're building the drinks that go on the menus at these world's 50 best bars and stuff, you have to take some chances. And I think Baijiu is one of those things that will take some, is an area where I could see people taking some chances. And I think just Asian culture continues to permeate deeper and deeper into Western culture as well. And I think we've seen that over the last kind of 15, 20 years. But this is one of, tea was an easy one. Green tea is, green tea, matcha lattes, matcha and stuff. All that's like, okay, matcha is kind of a different flavor, but it's not quite as extreme. But I think it's just a continuation of that same trend that we've been seeing.
I gotta say, it's a good answer. You're winning me over, because as much as if you're just saying, hey, and trust me, there have been plenty of people who have tried and said, hey, why don't you try this Baijiu? It's great, good quality, top shelf, et cetera, et cetera. And I just, you're going to have a very difficult time unless I'm already a few drinks in. But as a cocktail.
Exactly. No, I was going to say, who's trying to win you over? Like, I'm not trying to win you over with, here's this really interesting gin, please try it warm on all by itself. No, you mix it in with something, and you showcase the flavors, and you pair them together and highlight flavors and highlight the better parts and kind of hide the parts that aren't quite necessarily as nice.
Yeah, I can definitely see myself going for a Baijiu cocktail as either, one, just to like, okay, can they really do something with this? Or as just part of like, a masochistic drinking phase. I don't know. It's kind of a fun toss up to figure out what ends up happening. But yeah, I think that you kind of won me on that point. I'd be willing to give it a shot. So next one on the list, and this is one which I think is kind of fun for the discussion of sort of East meets West, because I think that in the East, they have a lot more prevalence and popularity than in the West. Bit of a bold claim, but mushrooms.
Yeah. I think I saw this on the New York Times 2022 food predictions, but I've been reading a lot about mushrooms lately. Everything from mushrooms being used to make fake leather, like for leather goods, for vegan leather products, for the environmentally conscious, to the psilocybin craze in the US, like the fact that they're making psychedelic mushrooms legal in certain states, plus they're using it to treat PTSD. Like, that's a lot of mushroom talk, but then just mushroom as an ingredient. And when I think about mushrooms back I was like working day to day in the industry, we did like mushroom burgers. A lot of our vegan and vegetarian dishes 20 years ago used mushrooms as that kind of meaty flavor component.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't surprise me that mushrooms would once again kind of rise in prevalence, especially when the last couple of years it's been kind of the fake meat craze, and fake meat's going to continue, right? So there was Impossible, Beyond, Tyndall. So all of these things are happening, but mushrooms are kind of that OG kind of meat replacement. And you can make some really meaty tasting stuff with mushrooms. They provide really depth of flavor. They're super versatile. Everything from, my Japanese mushroom names are terrible, but the long stringy guys that you'll see in like ramen, there you go, to portobellos and kind of everything in between. Chanterelles. I had some amazing chanterelles at a restaurant the other day. Like, there's just a ton to do with them. And I don't know that nobody's explicitly saying it's tied to the vegetarian and kind of vegan movement that I think is gaining momentum as well. But I do think that to me feels like one of the underlying kind of fuels for that growth in that sector.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because you're like, for the viewers, we didn't discuss this beforehand. He's just naturally pulling segues into the next, topics of discussion, because I did want to talk about sort of the fall meat craze, and where you see that in terms of and it seems as if you believe that it is the future and that it is going to become more prevalent and popular. But before I touch on that a little bit, I think that you're very right. One, the search for kind of really rich umami flavors in vegetarian cuisine, and I think that mushrooms are a great healthy way to get there. I think that, also as we've seen kind of various trends of like, this Asian cuisine kind of jumping over to the West and gaining popularity. We saw the ramen craze and the sushi craze and the poke craze and whatnot. I feel as if they're becoming a little bit more familiarized and open to sort of experimenting with it as they're starting to become get more visibility on the variety of techniques and ingredients that are used. Because at least personally, I feel like my only kind of thing with mushrooms was just sort of like chopped portobellos with gravy, stateside, and then like once I went to Asia, there's like, oh wow, you're getting all kinds of stuff. You can all these different varieties, different ways of preparation with different things added to it, which I think is kind of expanding the palette and the possibilities.
Yeah, it's funny that in a time where, for the last 2 years, nobody's really got to travel. And I wonder how much food exploration has increased as actual ability to explore and travel has decreased. So people still have that itch. I certainly still have that itch to taste and experience new things from new places, but I haven't been able to go anywhere in 2 years. So one way that you can do that is exploring through food. And some of it is making things yourself and trying out those, but then also it's like just seeking out that Nepalese restaurant, that Burmese restaurant, Vietnamese coffee. There's, any number of things that, Vietnamese coffee is a great one. A little taste of a Vietnamese coffee kind of brings me back to the streets of Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, and in an immediate fashion, because it's just so punch you in the face, like distinctly flavored. And, we don't drink much Robusta coffee anywhere else in the world. But that's exclusively what they grow in Vietnam. So that's exclusively what they drink. And like when you taste it, your heart palpitates differently. You can feel it.
I'm a little bit hesitant or cautious in terms of when you're saying your heart palpitates a little bit differently. But otherwise, it does sound like a ringing endorsement.
It really does. It's intense. At least on the streets of Ho Chi Minh City, it is. It'll get you going.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're very much right in the sense, like, at least personally, I've been kind of locked down in Taiwan, where I'm at, for roughly 2 years, and to the point where you just have to keep finding stuff to do. You can't just, look, Netflix is awesome. I'm enjoying Disney Plus, but there has to be life outside of that. There has to be something outside of, me working with the food that's in my wheelhouse of cooking, or in just, getting whatever's within a delivery radius. Like, it's been something I've paid a lot more attention to be adventurous in that one aspect of my life, because it's one of the only aspects where we can kind of be adventurous these days, and try out something that takes us beyond the borders of where we're at, and into a whole new world of flavor and a culture and all of those traditions that it brings with it.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite things about travel. And food has different purposes too. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I love about it, is it can be exploration and take you to a new place, but it can also be comforting and take you to home in a way that very few things. And I've needed both over the last 2 years as we're locked down here in Singapore. Finding mac and cheese balls at 28 Hong Kong Street is one of those things I've been eating for nearly a decade. And it just is like this little slice of like modern Americana that I just love. And it just makes me feel good. And, so does a Shake Shack burger every once in a while. I'm just like, yep, that's exactly what I needed right now. I needed a little taste of home, and you delivered perfectly.
It's funny because as you're talking about this, reminds me of I was trying to think of like what my equivalent would be. And really the first thing that comes to mind is like recently getting, I'm going to have to say this with a straight face, DJ Khaled's chicken wings. I know it seems strange, and I'm sure there are plenty of options in Taiwan around to find good kind of American style chicken wings. But when it's like 9 p.m. and you're just like, I got a bunch of other stuff to do, and you just happen to see it on the Uber Eats menu, it's hard to turn it down and just it's gonna have a solid, greasy, like American fast food type meal.
Oh, so good.
Which is not the best transition back to the Beyond Meat type discussion. But have you actually had any that you've like really enjoyed, or meat substitutes that you've like wow, I can't tell the difference? Is that a controversy? Did it just set you up?
No. I have mixed feelings on the alt meat category. So I'm going to give you my positive right now. Where do I think that what is the greatest thing that they're going to do? I want us to be an interplanetary species at someday, and being able to grow meat in a laboratory is a meaningful step towards that. So, Impossible, Beyond, Tyndall, all those things, I think they'd be great, like spaceship food. But for me, on a day-to-day basis, if I'm eating grass-fed, organic minced beef out of Australia versus a Impossible that's grown in the lab, I'm struggling to see how one's better for me than the other, as long as you take out the ethical standpoint of meat. Like from a health perspective, I don't know that they're much better or worse. I like my food to be food as much as humanly possible. Like if I want some cheese, I'm going to slice some cheese. I love a Dorito, but that's like, I feel bad about eating a Dorito. I don't feel bad about snacking on a little cheese. And like those kind of things kind of fit into that category for me. Like, I think it's important if I were vegan or vegetarian, which once again, there's lots of good reasons to eat less meat. One of my good friends, Zdenek, has long run a diet that I think is super respectable. Like during the week, he doesn't eat meat. He saves meat for special occasions on Saturday and Sunday, and not even every Saturday and Sunday, but he only eats it, on limited occasions. And for him, it's an environmental kind of first and foremost. Like, cows are not great for the environment. Now we have the smallest herd of cattle globally than we have in generations. Cows are bigger and there's fewer of them, but nonetheless, it's still not a pretty picture when you dive into, the industrial meat complex. So I can appreciate there's lots of good things and bad things about it. I still I want ethically raised meat that is having the smallest environmental impact possible, but I still want it to be from a cow. That's my personal take.
Yeah, I guess I'm right there with you. And when you have a way to speak to the nerd in me, because when you talk about it like replicator food as a Star Trek fan, I'm like, oh yeah, why not? Like let's do that. And at least personally, I haven't been too big a fan of some of the alternatives that I've tried. But in a way, I'm glad that it exists. Even though it's not, I don't feel like I'm the target market. I'm glad that it exists. And hey, I hope they continue to thrive and grow to the point where I think I'd actually kind of love it if they could turn me into a convert, because I'm like about as pro carnivore as they come. You say barbecue and I whip my head like a golden retriever when they hear the, trash guy coming down the street. But yeah, if I say, I'm glad that there is the market there that supports them now. So hopefully they can get to the point where, you put a plate of ribs in front of me and I'm like, I don't know where it came from. It looks like ribs. It tastes like ribs. I'll take the blue pill. Hey, like,
I think from a taste perspective, they're in an amazing spot. I've had some Impossible burgers, some Beyond burgers that I'm like, I don't mind. From a taste perspective, it's not better or worse than beef. Like, I think it can be equally delicious, and so much goes into what makes that good. But I think you can get to delicious outcomes with it. And I don't know. I'm not opposed to them. I just, I think they're like you. I'm happy that they're there. I don't seek it out, but I also don't shy away from it if it's presented.
I think it's been about 2 years since I've tried anything like that was vegetarian or vegan by like design, like, oh, I'm going to have a vegetarian or vegan meal. But I'm curious. Now this conversation has me curious as to like, well, I wonder where the science has come in that time. I mean, we've done a lot of other stuff in the meantime. Yeah. Elon's making androids. Like, so to move on into some of these sort of hot takes, I'm curious as to your thoughts on both bottled cocktails and mocktails as a thing.
Oh. So I have to like bottled cocktails. When COVID hit, Dispatcher, our distribution company, we're the importers and distributors of a bottled cocktail called Liba, which is out of China. Started by a couple of Danish guys who live in Shanghai, and it saved our butt. It was like, it really, when the rest of, when all of the bars were closing, the restaurants were closing, the hotels were closing, we shifted focus to selling direct to consumer bottled cocktails. And it was kind of the only channel that was really hitting on all cylinders. So it was a great product. And I think that the pandemic really globally brought this kind of the forefront. And what I love about the category is that, like, I might be able to make a rum punch at home, but there's a lot of people out there who are really good at making spectacular drinks. So being able to take a drink that was made by a bartender in London and have it in a bottled cocktail in Singapore is pretty cool, or vice versa. So I think that stuff is pretty cool. And as bars and restaurants need to kind of expand their revenue streams, doing some of this stuff is a really good way to do it, that you can have a taste of it at home on your own time. There's a restaurant here in Singapore called Luke's that's been doing kind of bottled cocktails for pre-pandemic. So they've been doing it for quite a while, and you could buy them off the shelf and take them home. And I always loved it. I thought it was a great idea. They did Bloody Mary as well. It was really amazing Bloody Mary. One of those drinks that I'm just never going to have all the ingredients to make at home or go through the hassle of making it. It's just too much work. There are some drinks at home, like I'm going to make my own martini. It's gin, it's vermouth. I'm off and running, no big deal. I'm going to make my own gin and tonics. Probably not going to buy a bottle of gin and tonic, but like all of those more interesting ones, I think it's a great way for bartenders and bars to kind of build profile beyond their physical border and reach more people. And as you get bigger and try to compete on those higher levels, these are the kind of things that are helpful. Plus, if you're doing takeaway business, it's a great add-on to your Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Grab food order. It's like, you know what? Yes, I would like a 750 milliliter bottle of mezcal Negronis. That sounds fantastic. I don't have mezcal at home, and this will be a great way. It runs up the ticket price, gets you some extra sales, and it's a really good one. So I'm a huge fan of bottled cocktails, and I think there are some really great environments for it. This is the other thing that I think is amazing, besides just expanding your reach, is environments where you don't have necessarily highly skilled staff. When you don't have that world's 50 best bartender behind the stick making drinks, but you want to turn out good drinks. So hotel mini bars, perfect spot for bottled cocktails. Really high volume places in general. I know some great some high-end cocktail bars that pre-batch as much of their drinks as they can because they're doing high volumes. So they still want to do handcrafted drinks, but like pre-batching a Negroni, there's no downside to pre-batching Negronis. You're not making a year's worth of them. You're making a day's worth or 2 days worth or something, and so it can really expedite service, give you greater consistency, and kind of provide you some protection from labor shortages. And I think that's Singapore is notorious for having, like, I think I saw a stat the other day that said there's 250 job postings right now for every 100 people. So there's 2.5 jobs for every person that's looking for a job. And F&B is, depending on where you are, it's just not highly sought after. So you're trying to do as much as you can with, whether it's a transient labor force, part-time labor force, or just constantly being short-staffed, can really help across all those spaces.
It makes a lot of sense. I personally kind of recently discovered the bottled cocktail craze on my own, just organically. I went to for my girlfriend and I's anniversary dinner. We just went to a restaurant and they had cocktails to go. I said, "Well, I've already had one here. I'm at a happy level, but not at the level I intend to stay at for the rest of the night. Let's take a couple more for the road." And it's nice. And it's also something in which, as something that I can do, it's like, I know that one drink is unique and specific to that place. So anytime I want to go ahead and have that taste, I just stop by there, pick up a, couple cocktails. And now that's like, now I look awesome too, because it's like, oh, hey, I got the exact same cocktail we had on the anniversaries and blah, blah, blah. And it's just a nice way to, add some color to your dining experiences without all the fuss. You can see, oh, wow, this looks fun and this looks great. And, I get to pour it out of a nice shaker cup. But what you don't see is, or I had to slice up the limes and the oranges. And it can be, a bit labor intensive when sometimes when you want to drink, the last thing you want to do is to do more work to get to it. You want the fewest steps as possible between wanting the drink and having it in your hand. So I think it's a really awesome thing. And I think that I really would love to see more bars come up with, their own signature takes on either existing recipes or their own recipes, and putting them out there for, for the world to taste. Like I see, for example, Atlas, and looking at all of the awesome stuff on their menu. And, we recently did a contest with them. So I was scoping them out. And for the viewership, just a reminder, while Jeff and crew are in Singapore, I'm all the way over in Taiwan, which doesn't seem like a great distance, except we're talking about countries and, it's a pandemic. And with that, I'm like, I really wish I could try some of that. Like, that Singapore sling would be awesome just to, give it a shot. And while I know that eventually I will make it over to Singapore and will get a chance to try it firsthand, it'd be great if I could just order, order a few here and anytime Hey, I feel like I'm having a Singapore day. There we go.
I have to admit, I do have some Atlas martinis in my fridge right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is what it is. They're delicious. It's my favorite martini in the world, and I like martinis. The Atlas martini is spectacular. Something about the champagne bitters, it's just great. But you're right. And when you do get a chance to travel, it'll be really fun to, you'll have been, we've been talking about these places for months already, but by the time you get here, it'll be whatever, 5-6 months of talking about the Singapore market. And we'll have a busy schedule for you.
Oh, I've got like, when you see like those movies where they're like trying to catch the killer and they have like the red string board on the cork and whatnot, like I have this entire mental map of like, okay, gonna hit up this restaurant, that bar, and gonna go get this snack here and whatnot. Like I'm taking mental notes as all these places are discussed. Trust me, there's gonna be a lot of eating when I come to Singapore, and drinking too.
Yeah, we'll have to put together a couple of itineraries. That'll be a fun one to share out to people too. Some of our favorite, because I did one ages ago because we used to have a lot of visitors, and of course that's died down to having no visitors. But also the scene has changed. Bars and restaurants turn over, they move, chefs move
Menus
from place
change.
to place. Exactly, and the identity of a bar and restaurant will change over time based on the people who are there. So I haven't redone one, partly because it's like, well, there's no visitors, so I'm not really very motivated to do it. But the days are coming. The days are coming.
And I think this kind of transitions nicely into sort of one thing I was thinking about, and that we're discussing sort of all of the. And it's fun to talk about like, oh, which, food item or which sort of food trend is going to kick off. But I think that, and one of the other ones that had come to mind, and just to sort of go through the list a little bit faster, is about 1, smaller menus, and 2, prepayment for bookings. And I think that both of those are less indicative of, we'll say, diner choices or food trends in terms of like what the consumer's really feeling at the moment, versus sort of a transition towards, hey, how do we make the most out of, dealing with this COVID situation and pivot in a graceful way? I'm kind of curious in terms of where do you feel about just the industry at large, or even if you want to just speak to the sort of microcosm that is Singapore, because it's got such a really robust and vibrant F&B scene. Like, where do you kind of feel things are at with the F&B space, and how do you think that as a whole, I imagine there's a lot of people who they've been working in the bar and restaurant, or maybe they own or manage their own, and they kind of figured it out. They're like, hey, I've got this. I know how to run things. I've got my playbook. I know how to, run the recipes. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. They now have to sort of think everything. And again, I know I'm rambling a bit here, but one thing you discussed was you see people still using the same POS systems after quite some time. And I kind of thought about it, previously the mantra was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I don't think that mantra is very well serving the current F&B scene, because I think now it needs to really be a different trend or a different culture of, if it's not optimized, don't keep it. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
No, I like that a lot. I think, I think that a lot of the things you talked about are symptoms of what the disease was. The underlying disease has been really kind of peeled back and born to the world through the pandemic, is that the industry has been run on short-staffed, long hours, hardworking people. And in 2020 and 2021, a lot of those people had to step away from the industry because the bars and restaurants and hotels that they worked at closed. And suddenly you had people who were like, so I'm unemployed. There's a global pandemic. This is really hard. Most governments around the world did a great job of supporting their people so that, people could survive and not, at least be okay. But you had these workers who were suddenly like, so this is what it feels like to not work 80 hours a week behind the grill. After a couple of weeks, you're like, oh, my feet don't hurt. I kind of forgot that my feet hurt all the time. That's what that feeling was. These bags under my eyes are going away. My
I don't have as much anxiety.
Yeah. And I heard someone describe it as you don't get into, working in F&B isn't a job, it's a lifestyle choice. And I think in many places it really is, especially, it's just kind of the way that it is. It's hardworking, long hours. So I think what I mean by that is that everybody needs to find a way to do more with less, I guess, is where it fundamentally kind of boils down to. I was in the States for a couple of weeks to see some of that. Places were short-staffed. They did not have enough people. So kind of coming back to limited menus, there's also supply chain issues. So these are the things that I can do, but also running a more limited menu means that you can kind of run with less people. There's less prep work to do. There's less kind of just less to do.
It's more focused.
Yeah. And it's not that there's, it's not that there's less to do, but it's more narrowly defined work to do. And then from a staffing perspective, you're seeing, front of house staff, hard to come by. So how do you make people more efficient in that perspective? Self-service, I think, will increase. The other one, I think that middle tier, kind of quick, fast casual, fine dining is always going to be fine dining, and it's always going to be staffed in the way that it's been staffed, because that's the expectation. When you're paying $500 for a meal, there's enough money to go around. But if you're talking about that kind of $10 to $20 lunch dinner, that's pretty kind of cheap and cheerful, can't deliver that same level of service. So a little more self-service, whether that's QR code menu ordering. I was at JFK in New York, and on every table in the bar restaurant in the airport, I had a 4-hour layover at JFK. It was a Saturday, so there was football on and there was beer getting poured, so it wasn't all that bad. But on every side of every table was an iPad for ordering. So I would just beer. I would push the button and the beer would come. There's 40 iPads in this place. Just that's a lot of money to be throwing out on tech, but whatever. It was, but there was only one staff person working, and they were covering off what would normally be 2 or 3 people. And I don't think that's because 40 iPads is not cheap, and so it's a matter of necessity. But the last one that you mentioned, and these are the areas of the business that I think are really drive home the point of your points, which I really liked, which is, it's not, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's not optimized, don't keep it. And the reservation system that runs kind of all of the restaurants of the world. Once again, once you get beyond kind of that fast casual into places that are taking reservations, the system that has been in place forever is absolutely mind-blowing. The fact that I can hold one of your very limited, very valuable spots by just saying, I want to come, without providing any more guarantee than that, is insane. And it's just completely unfair to restaurants, because no-shows kill your numbers. You turn away customers who are coming, who do want to be there. And it's this balancing act that's so hard. So I do think that you're going to get more restaurants requiring you to pay for that reservation. There's a reservation system in the US called TOC. It's by the guys from Alinea. And, they have every spot at Alinea is booked out forever, right? They don't have a problem putting butts in seats, but they're like, why do we deal with this? They still, even when they first launched, they were still dealing with no-shows. And that's, a 2-top at Alinea is, probably $1,000 or $1,500 pretty easily. And by someone no-showing and you not filling that slot, that's just lost revenue that you can't replace, because nobody rocks up to these places thinking they can just get in. Right. It's just like
you're not doing a walk in out in the air. Like it's
no. I tried to walk into Gramercy Tavern on Friday night, the week before Christmas, and they don't. A lot of places in New York didn't take reservations in certain areas. Like there'd be bar seating where they wouldn't take reservations, or Momofuku Noodle Bar didn't do reservations. So I was like, sweet, because I'm not necessarily always the most planned person. So I'm like, but I know enough to know that these are the places that don't do reservations. So I can just show up. And I got to Noodle Bar and they're like, sorry, do you have a reservation? I was like, I didn't know that you took reservations. And they're like, yeah, with the pandemic, we're just in order to fill seats and ensure kind of smooth operations, we're doing it. I'm like, oh, okay. We were able to get in an hour and a half later, but it worked out fine. But we showed up at Gramercy Tavern at like 5:30. And I was hoping to just get in early and go to the bar, and no chance. There was like 25 people at the bar. The bartender was trying to take reservations, and I was like, it's probably like, keep the list. And I was like, this is probably a bad idea anyways. So more restaurants going to that. Personally, I never feel bad about it. Especially if they're flexible from a rescheduling perspective. Like, hey, 48 hours in advance, you can reschedule it. Something along those lines. Have systems in place where you can have a wait list where, hey, I really want to go on Friday night, but there's no spots. Look, put me on the wait list. I'm happy to drop some, I'll drop everything to get a table at Alinea on no notice, or that kind of stuff. So I think that's the kind of stuff that's happening. And then I think, but this is the unsexy part of the business that you don't have as many people thinking about. What you had was, general managers. This would probably fall into their category, but they're like, I'm trying to staff. I'm trying to get ordering done. I'm trying to make sure that all the pieces are in place. And so they're stretched as thin as everybody else. So I think that all these things are ways, and frankly, this is why we built OrderEZ as well, was let's take some of that burden, some of that administrative burden off of the table and free up your time to do the things that are fundamentally why you got into the business and what people really care about. If by never having to deal with reservations, it saves you 10 hours a month, and that means that you can come up with a new menu, come up with a new cocktail, come up with a new menu item or a special or whatever, that's far more interesting and valuable to the business. And if you don't spend 10 hours a month just ordering the stuff that you do, you're not shopping, you're just ordering. Like, hey, these are the 10 things that I order like all the time, or the 50 things that I order every single week. The fact that people are typing out the emails, WhatsApping their
texting,
rep,
calling,
and waiting for the back and forth. All that stuff just seemed crazy to us. We're like, listen, if we can free people from that, I feel like this is going to sound kind of cheesy, but I feel like we're giving a gift to the industry that we love so much. Like, and if it makes their life better and allows them to kind of make my dining experience, my drinking experience better, then I'm all the more for it. And I think the fundamental kind of tie that binds all of this together is, the way you said it was great. You have to optimize this stuff. And oftentimes, if it's not the squeaky wheel, you're not going to pay attention to it. You're like, oh, I've done it this way always. It'll just get done. But if you do invest the time and be thoughtful about it, so how can I shave off, hour a day dealing with reservations, 2 hours a day dealing with ordering, an hour a day dealing with scheduling. Oh, I hated scheduling. These are all things that just eat up time. And technology has gotten to a spot where you can optimize that. And with dwindling labor forces, all these things are going to become more and more important. So, that's where I think, it's an overworked industry. There's no industry that I think works harder than F&B and hospitality in general. And anything you can do to give them time back to focus on their core stuff is super valuable.
I think too, to sort of speak generally, like not even just the core stuff. I mean, I think that, yes, from the perspective of someone who's, running their own business, and if they've now gotten to cut down the time spent on, menial tasks, by 20 or more percent, the easy sort of like thing is like, okay, now you can focus on really what's going to, you know, drive your business, what's going to drive your business growth. And that's super important. But also just some aspect of too of like, hey, guess what? Why don't you use that extra time and like go home, watch a Netflix show, get some sleep, like, you know, get a chance to go to another restaurant and enjoy the stuff that, you know, you get to provide for someone else. Like, I think that you discuss the F&B as a lifestyle choice, and right now is a good time for us to sort of shake up. What does that mean? Just because we got used to these old systems and this old stress, and, you know, granted, I'm far divorced from my time as a line cook, but I can tell you it was stressful, and it was stressful enough that I did marketing. I'm like, okay, we're going to go out of there. But, you know, as someone who really appreciates the F&B experiences, who loves food, you know, foodie to the core, I love the industry. I love every time I get excited when I have a new reservation and whatnot. Like, I don't want my good experiences to be built on the back of suffering. Like, it's kind of a weird dynamic.
True.
I'm okay with a smaller menu if it lets them focus on just delivering a few core experiences that are great. Focus on them, you know, automating the things that they don't need to focus on, so that way they have a little bit more time to relax and, you know, do what it is that they do to maintain their balance. I think that at a core, as you're becoming more appreciative of, you know, the things that we kind of didn't have during lockdown, I don't think I'm alone in this sentiment. I think that overall we're starting to become more appreciative. Hopefully, I hope. Maybe it's just the optimistic side, but appreciative of you know, the people that are responsible for making those experiences happen, and you know, ultimately rooting for their success.
Absolutely. It is such a great point. And I'll admit to having entrepreneur blinders on here. Like, I just work a lot because, you know, I'm all in on building a business right now. But
Of course,
you're absolutely right that, you know, getting back a little bit of time, spend some time with your significant other, spend some time with your kids, spend your time, you know, having a life outside of your job. And I think that's a very, very admirable and honorable goal as well. And if we can help someone achieve that through any of this stuff, through any of these efficiencies, through any of this technology stuff, like that's, you know, hopefully we can change the industry a little bit from that perspective. Such a great point.
yeah, you know, I'd love to see that, not only for the people, but I think that it's one of those things where it's like the well, how's the expression go? Like, the rising tide raises all the ships. It's like even another aspect to it. And I can't imagine this is a unique experience, but a good friend of mine is a chef in the States. And he talked about sort of at length about like, okay, once I got out of the mechanic, like autopilot, everyday hustle bustle, like I'm doing what I'm doing, you know, he's running a kitchen. It forced him to reevaluate his relationship with food and kind of go back to the passion side of it and go back to the basics of it and all of those things which are part of his sort of journey through flavor and to becoming a better chef. And I'm more excited to try his food than ever, like after a long layoff. And I hope that, you know, we're starting to see this where more of the time is going to be spent less on the minutia, less on the things which don't matter, and giving more attention to the core and to the people that make these experiences as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I think on that note, I have just a tad bit left in my cocktail, and I will say a cheers to all those in the F&B space. And, you know, you're appreciated. And I look forward to additional further meals and cocktails to come, as well as hopefully getting more opportunities to discuss these in the future with you all. So, cheers.
Thank you for joining us, and cheers.